The city never slept, but he often wished it would. From the top of his penthouse, billionaire Richard Hale looked down at the glowing streets below. Cars streamed like veins of light. Neon signs pulsed with artificial promises. And yet, he felt nothing. Money, power, luxury, he had it all. Or at least, that's what the world believed. Behind the gold-plated doors of his empire, Richard lived a hollow existence. He had built companies, bought mansions, crushed rivals. And yet the one thing he could not control was the slow decay of his soul. His wife had left years ago, unable to breathe in the sterile air of his ambition. His daughter, Sophia, loved him but rarely saw him. Her childhood had been stolen by board meetings, phone calls, and private jets. That night, however, something shifted. Richard had just sealed a billion-dollar deal, one that would make headlines the next morning. He should have been ecstatic. Instead, as he raised his glass of champagne to the skyline, a sharp pain pierced his chest. His vision blurred. The glass slipped from his hand, shattering into 1,000 glittering shards on the marble floor. "Sir?" His butler's voice was muffled as the world tilted. Richard fell forward, crashing onto the cold stone. Darkness swallowed him whole. When he opened his eyes, he wasn't in his penthouse anymore. He was standing barefoot on a vast, endless plain. The sky above glowed with a light that wasn't the sun. It was something deeper, purer, eternal. His chest no longer hurt, but his soul trembled that a voice thundered, not outside him, but inside Richard Hale. He froze. The sound carried weight, authority, and yet tenderness. Who's there?" Richard whispered. The light around him shifted, forming a presence he could not fully comprehend. It wasn't a man, nor a woman, nor anything earthly. It was God. He felt it in his bones, in the marrow of his existence. "You have built an empire," the voice said, "but you have built it upon sand. You have sought riches, yet neglected love. You stand before me, not as a billionaire, but as a soul naked of meaning." Richard trembled. His lips quivered. "Am I dead?" "You stand at the edge," God answered. "Life and eternity hang by a thread, but I am giving you a choice." Richard's heart pounded. "A choice?" "Yes," the voice said. "If you love me, if you wish to live again, then you must save her." "Save who?" Richard asked, his voice cracking that a vision unfolded before him. He saw Maria, the quiet maid who had worked in his mansion for over 15 years. She had always been there, dusting bookshelves he never read, polishing floors he never touched, bowing her head when he walked past. He had barely spoken more than a few words to her. And then he saw a girl, thin, fragile, her face pale with sickness. "Maria's daughter, her?" Richard asked, stunned. "Yes," the voice echoed. "The child is dying. Doctors cannot save her. But you can. If you love me, save your maid's daughter. Give what you never gave before, your heart." The plane trembled. The light flared. Richard fell to his knees. "But why me? I don't even know her." "Because," God's voice softened, "to save her, you must first save yourself." And then, darkness, Richard gasped awake, his body jerking as paramedics worked over him. A defibrillator had just shocked his chest. The butler's face hovered above, pale with fear. "Sir, stay with us." Richard coughed, his throat raw. He wasn't dead. Not yet. But his heart knew he had been given a mission that as the ambulance sirens wailed. One thought thundered louder than the pain in his chest. He had to find Maria's daughter. He had to save her, or lose his soul forever. The sterile smell of disinfectant clung to the air as Richard woke in the hospital. Machines beeped steadily beside him, monitoring every fragile beat of his heart. His chest ached, his throat was dry, and yet his mind was burning, not with fear of death, but with the memory of that voice, God, that it couldn't have been a dream. He remembered every word, every vibration of that presence. "If you love me, save your maid's daughter." But why her? Why Maria's child? Of all the things God could demand, charity, confession, surrender of wealth, why that? He had barely noticed Maria in his house over the years. She moved silently through corridors like a shadow, respectful, invisible. He knew little about her life except that she worked tirelessly, never complained, and rarely asked for favors. Now, lying in that hospital bed, Richard felt something he hadn't in years. curiosity that wasn't tied to profit. When the nurse came in, he asked, "Is my staff here? My butler, my maid?" The nurse looked puzzled, but nodded. "Yes, there's a woman waiting outside. She's been here since the ambulance brought you." Richard's chest tightened. "Send her in." Maria entered quietly, clutching her handbag like it was the last thing she owned. She looked smaller here, beneath the bright hospital lights, her uniform wrinkled, her eyes red as if she hadn't slept in days. "Mr. Hale," she whispered, bowing her head. I was so worried." Richard studied her for a long moment. In 15 years he had barely spoken to her, and now he felt almost ashamed of his own blindness. "Maria," he said slowly, "you've worked for me a long time." "Yes, sir," she replied, hands trembling. "Since Sophia was a baby." His throat tightened at the mention of his daughter. "Sophia. I've barely been a father to her either." He swallowed hard. "Maria, you have a daughter, don't you?" Maria froze. Her eyes widened, as if he had spoken a forbidden word. "Sir, why do you ask?" Richard leaned forward, ignoring the ache in his chest. "Because I need to know. Tell me about her." Tears brimmed in Maria's eyes. She sank into the chair beside his bed, her voice breaking. "Her name is Isabella. She's 12 years old. Bright, kind, so full of life." Maria paused, choking on her own words. "But she's sick. Very sick." Richard felt his pulse quicken. What kind of sickness? Maria clutched her hands together. "Her kidneys are failing. Doctors say, without a transplant, she won't survive." The room spun. Richard closed his eyes, hearing again the thunderous voice. "The child is dying. Doctors cannot save her. But you can. Have you tried the hospitals?" "The specialists," he pressed. Maria nodded desperately. "I've tried everything. They say we need money for surgery, treatment, travel. But I can't afford it. Every cent I make goes to her medicine. I pray every night for a miracle." Her shoulders shook as tears slipped down her cheeks. "I never told you, because I knew you wouldn't care." Those words pierced deeper than any knife. He hadn't cared. For years, Maria had served his household faithfully, and he had never once asked about her life, her struggles, her child. He had been too wrapped in his empire, his wealth, his pride. But God cared. God had shown him. Richard took a deep, painful breath. "Maria, where is she now?" Maria's eyes widened in surprise. "At home. She can barely leave the bed." "I want to see her," he said firmly. Maria blinked, confused. "Sir, you want to come to my home?" "Yes," Richard said, his voice steady with a conviction he hadn't felt in years. "I need to meet Isabella." That evening, against the protests of his doctors, Richard left the hospital. His driver and butler were baffled as he ordered them not to take him to his penthouse, but to the modest neighborhood where Maria lived. The car turned off the main boulevard into a labyrinth of narrow streets. Neon lights gave way to flickering lamps. Skyscrapers turned to crumbling apartments. Richard stared out the tinted window, ashamed. This city had always been his kingdom, yet he had never seen how its other half lived. Finally, they stopped before a weathered building with peeling paint and broken steps. Maria led him up 3 flights of creaking stairs, her hands shaking as she unlocked the door. Inside, the apartment was small, barely 3 rooms. The furniture was worn, the air faint with disinfectant and boiled herbs. Yet there was warmth, a kind of love that no mansion could buy. Maria motioned toward the bedroom. "She's inside." Richard stepped softly across the floor. His heart pounding that on the bed lay a fragile girl. Her skin was pale, her body thin, but her eyes, when they opened, they sparkled with a light that nearly stopped his breath. "Isabella," Maria whispered gently. "This is Mr. Hale. He's my employer." The girl smiled faintly. "Hi, Mr. Hale." Her voice was weak, but sweet. Richard swallowed the lump in his throat. He had shaken hands with kings, presidents, billionaires, but never had he felt so small before another human being. "Hello, Isabella," he whispered. "It's an honor to meet you." And in that moment, Richard Hale, the man who had bought everything money could buy, realized there was one thing he had never truly given: compassion. And now his soul depended on it. For the first time in his life, Richard Hale felt powerless. He stood at the edge of Isabella's small bed, staring at her fragile frame beneath the thin blanket. Machines weren't humming here, no expensive monitors, no private nurses. Just a 12-year-old girl clinging to life with nothing but her mother's love and a few second-hand medicines. Maria sat at her daughter's side, holding her tiny hand. She looked up at Richard, her face torn between gratitude and fear. "I didn't want you to see her like this," she whispered. "I didn't want pity." "Maria," Richard said, his voice rough, "this isn't pity. This is responsibility." The word shocked even him. Responsibility. He had spent his life avoiding it, outsourcing it, burying it under piles of contracts and legal teams. He had taken care of companies, not people. But here, in this modest room, he couldn't hide behind wealth that Isabella's large brown eyes blinked up at him. "Are you one of Mommy's bosses?" Richard hesitated. How could he explain what he was? A man who had overlooked them for years, now suddenly thrown into their lives by divine command. "Yes," he finally said softly. "I guess you could say that. But maybe I can be your friend, too." Her weak smile lit up the room. "I don't have many friends. Most kids don't come around anymore." Richard's chest tightened. The loneliness in her voice echoed his own. For all his money, for all the parties and crowds, he had lived in isolation. Now, this child's honesty cut through his walls like sunlight through glass. Later, as Maria tucked Isabella back to rest, Richard stepped into the tiny kitchen. The ceiling was low, the table scratched, the cupboards half empty. He thought of his penthouse kitchen, with its marble counters and imported wines. Yet somehow, this small space felt more real. Maria joined him quietly. "Sir, you've already done enough, just by coming here." "You don't have to." He raised his hand. "Maria, listen to me. I'm going to save her." She froze. "What?" "I'm not talking about charity," Richard continued, his voice hard with conviction. "I'm not talking about writing a check so I can feel like a hero. I'm talking about doing whatever it takes to keep Isabella alive. Money, doctors, treatment, I'll give it all. She will not die. Not while I can do something." Tears filled Maria's eyes. She shook her head, overwhelmed. "You don't understand, sir. It's not just about money. The waiting list for a transplant, it's years long. We don't have time." Richard stepped closer, his gaze fierce. "Then I'll use every connection I have. Every hospital, every specialist, every politician I've ever shaken hands with. I've bent the world for business. I'll bend it again, but this time for her." Maria's lips trembled. "Why? Why would you do this for us?" Richard paused. How could he explain? That God himself had spoken to him? That his own soul's redemption depended on this child? It sounded mad, even to his own ears. At last he said quietly, "Because it's the right thing. And because I think I was blind for too long." Maria covered her mouth, sobbing silently. For the first time in years, someone was fighting for her daughter, not out of obligation, but out of choice. That night, back in his car, Richard stared at the city lights again. But they looked different now. Less like trophies, more like fragile stars. His butler, sitting across from him, finally asked the question he had been holding back. "Sir, why did you go there? Why her?" Richard's eyes remained fixed on the window. "Because I was given a second chance. And if I don't use it, it won't matter how much money I have." The butler frowned, but said nothing more. He had served Richard long enough to know when not to pry. The next morning, Richard began to act. He called in favors from top surgeons, arranged meetings with hospitals, and demanded solutions from people who normally only heard his voice when millions of dollars were on the line. Some thought he had lost his mind. Others thought it was a publicity stunt. But Richard didn't care. For the first time, his fortune had a purpose beyond his ego. When Sophia, his daughter, returned from boarding school that evening, she found her father pacing the study, phone pressed to his ear, barking orders. She stood in the doorway, arms crossed. "Who's Isabella?" she asked bluntly. Richard froze. He turned, seeing the suspicion in his daughter's eyes. She was 16 now, sharp, independent, and distant. "She's Maria's daughter," Richard said carefully. Sophia raised a brow. "The maid's kid? And why do you suddenly care?" The words stung. They mirrored his own doubts. But he answered honestly, "Because she deserves a chance to live. And because I think helping her might save me, too." Sophia's eyes softened just a little. You mean like when Mom said you only cared about money? Richard winced. Yes. Maybe I'm trying to change that. For the first time in years, father and daughter looked at each other not as strangers, but as people learning to be honest. That night, Richard made a silent vow as he looked out the window of his penthouse. He would not let Isabella die. He would not fail Maria. And somewhere deep in the stillness of his heart, he hoped God was watching. The morning sun spilled across Richard's office, but its warmth didn't touch him. He sat behind his massive desk, not surrounded by contracts or profit charts, but by stacks of medical reports, donor lists, and hospital schedules. For once, his empire of glass towers and steel contracts meant nothing. Only one name mattered. Isabella, that he had spent the last 48 hours calling every top hospital in the country. He had spoken with renowned surgeons, kidney specialists, even politicians who owed him favors. Money wasn't the problem. He had more than enough to cover any treatment. The problem was time. Mr. Hale, said Dr. Bennett, a respected transplant specialist on the other end of the line. I understand your urgency. But you have to realize, organ transplants aren't bought. There's a waiting list. Patients are matched by compatibility, by medical criteria. Even with influence, I can't bypass that without risking my license. Richard gripped the phone tighter. Doctor, listen to me. This is a 12-year-old girl. She doesn't have months, let alone years. There must be something, some trial, some international connection, something that can save her. Dr. Bennett sighed heavily. I'll look into accelerated donor networks. But even then, the odds are slim. I'm sorry. The line went dead. Richard slammed the phone down, anger boiling in his veins. He wasn't used to hearing no. He had toppled competitors, bent laws, built empires. And now, the one thing he needed most, the life of a child, was beyond his control. Maria arrived at his office later that afternoon, carrying a small paper bag with homemade food. She stood uncertainly at the door, as if she didn't belong in this skyscraper of glass and marble. I brought you something, she said softly. You've been working so hard, I thought maybe you didn't eat. Richard blinked at her. Nobody had brought him food in years. Meals were always prepared, plated, delivered. He looked down at the simple dish, rice, beans, and roasted chicken. Nothing fancy. Yet it warmed him more than any Michelin-starred dinner. He gestured for her to sit. Maria, I'm trying everything. But the system, I know, she interrupted gently. I've been living with that system for years. Waiting in endless hospital lines, filling out forms no one reads, being told maybe, while watching her fade. That's why I stopped hoping. It hurt too much. Richard leaned forward, eyes burning. Don't stop now. Not when we're this close. I promised you I'd save her, and I will. Maria looked at him for a long moment, tears shining. Why do you care so much, Mr. Hale? You've never cared before. Why now? Richard opened his mouth, then closed it again. How could he tell her about the voice, the light, the God who had given him a second chance? Would she think him insane? Finally he whispered, because I was given a warning. And if I don't save Isabella, I'll lose something far greater than money. Maria's breath caught. She didn't understand, not fully, but she saw something new in his eyes, a fire she had never seen before. The next days blurred into a storm of calls, meetings, and frustration. Richard sent his private jet to fetch specialists from across the globe. He offered blank checks to research facilities. He even considered black market options, but the risk of harming Isabella was too great. Sophia watched him from a distance, bewildered. Her father, once cold, distant, untouchable, was now consumed with saving someone else's child. One evening, she confronted him again. Why her, Dad? Why not me? You never fought like this when Mom left. You never fought for me. The words hit like a dagger. Richard's chest tightened. Sophia, I failed you. I failed your mother. I failed everyone I should have loved. But maybe saving Isabella is how I can learn to love again. Tears welled in Sophia's eyes, but she quickly wiped them away. She didn't forgive him, not yet, but for the first time, she wanted to believe he could change. Despite his efforts, the news remained grim. Isabella's condition worsened. She grew weaker, her small body barely able to sit up. One night, Richard sat by her bedside in Maria's apartment. He had never stayed in a place so modest, so fragile. Yet here, in the dim glow of a single lamp, he felt more human than in all his penthouses combined. Isabella stirred, opening her eyes. "Mr. Hale?" "Yes, sweetheart," he whispered, leaning closer. "Why are you helping me?" Richard's throat tightened. He had no rehearsed answer, no polished speech. Only the truth. "Because someone told me your life matters more than all my money. And I think they were right." Isabella smiled faintly. "Then maybe God sent you." The words struck him like lightning. He blinked, stunned. She didn't know about his vision, his near-death encounter. Yet she spoke it aloud, as if she were echoing the very voice he had heard. His hands trembled as he touched hers. Maybe he did. The next morning, a call came from Dr. Bennett. His voice was urgent. "Mr. Hale, there may be a donor match. It's rare, but it's possible. The only complication, your own compatibility is surprisingly close." Richard froze. His own body, his own kidney. The doctor continued, "It's risky at your age, given your recent heart attack. Surgery could be dangerous. But if you consent, you could save her." Silence filled the room. Richard's mind reeled. The billionaire who had conquered the world was now faced with the ultimate choice. His health, his safety, his life, against the fragile life of a child he had barely known. And in that silence, Richard remembered God's words, "If you love me, save your maid's daughter." The words echoed in Richard's ears long after Dr. Bennett ended the call. Your compatibility is close. If you consent, you could save her. But the surgery is dangerous, especially for you. Richard sat in silence, his hands trembling on the polished wood of his desk. All his life, he had signed contracts that shifted billions of dollars, crushed companies, and determined the fate of others. But no pen stroke had ever carried weight like this choice. He could save Isabella, but it might kill him. That night, Richard couldn't sleep. The city lights shimmered outside his window, a dazzling reminder of everything he owned. Yet all the gold in the world suddenly seemed meaningless compared to the life of one little girl. But he remembered the first time he had looked into Isabella's eyes, so full of warmth despite her suffering. He remembered her words, "Maybe God sent you." If he walked away now, he would betray not only Maria and Isabella, but also the voice he had heard on that endless plain. Still, fear gnawed at him. He had just survived one brush with death. Could he really gamble his life again? The next morning, Richard met with Dr. Bennett in person. The doctor laid the risks on the table with cold, clinical precision. "Mr. Hale, kidney donation is generally safe for healthy adults. But you are not in ideal condition. Your heart is weak. The surgery could trigger complications, cardiac arrest, organ failure. There's no guarantee you'll come out alive." Maria sat beside Richard, her face pale, her hands clasped tightly. Isabella lay in a hospital bed nearby, drifting in and out of sleep. Richard listened, nodding slowly. Then he asked, "If I don't do this, how long does she have?" The doctor hesitated. "Weeks, maybe less." Maria broke down, sobbing silently. Richard placed a hand on her shoulder, something he had never done before. "I'll do it," he said firmly. That Maria's head shot up. "No, you can't. Not after what happened to your heart." "If something happens to you," Richard interrupted softly. "Maria, my life was already empty. That night I collapsed. I should have died. God gave me another chance. And he told me why. If I walk away now, I might keep breathing, but my soul will be dead." Maria shook her head, tears streaming. "You don't owe us this. You're a billionaire. You don't risk your life for people like us." Richard's voice broke. "Maybe that's the problem. Maybe it's time I do." The preparations began. Legal teams swarmed with paperwork. The hospital scrambled to assemble a surgical team. And the media began sniffing around when rumors spread of Richard Hale checking into a public hospital. Sophia stormed into the room the night before the surgery. Her eyes were red from crying, her hands clenched. "Dad, are you insane? You just had a heart attack. You can't do this." Richard looked at her gently. "Sophia, I have to." "No, you don't," she shouted. "You don't even know this girl. She's not family. Why would you throw your life away for her?" Richard stood, slowly, his legs weak, but his voice strong. "Because family isn't just blood, Sophia. It's love. And if I die tomorrow, At least you'll know your father finally understood that. Sophia's lips quivered. But what about me? What if I lose you? Richard placed his hands on her shoulders, tears burning his own eyes. Then you'll know I died doing something right. Something I should have done a long time ago. And maybe you'll forgive me one day. For the first time in years, Sophia threw her arms around him, clinging tightly. He held her close, heart aching with both fear and love. The night was long. Richard sat by Isabella's bedside, watching her sleep. Her small chest rose and fell with fragile breaths. He whispered, "You're stronger than I ever was. Tomorrow you'll have a new chance. Don't waste it. Live. Love. Be more than I ever was." And though she slept, a faint smile curled on her lips, as if some part of her heard him. The morning of the surgery arrived. The hospital bustled with urgency. Nurses moved quickly, doctors prepared instruments, machines beeped with steady anticipation. Maria knelt beside Richard before he was wheeled into the operating room. Her tears fell freely onto his hand. "Mr. Hale, I can never repay you. If you don't make it," Richard squeezed her hand weakly. "Promise me one thing. Raise her with love. Teach her to give what I never gave. That's all the repayment I want." Maria sobbed, nodding. "I promise." As the gurney rolled forward, Richard looked up at the ceiling lights passing above him. His body trembled, but his soul felt strangely calm that he whispered a final prayer in his heart. "If I love you, Lord, let this be enough." The doors swung shut. The world outside faded, and Richard Hale, billionaire, conqueror of empires, entered the battle that no money could win. The cold air of the operating room wrapped around Richard like a shroud. Sterile lights beamed down, white and unforgiving, as doctors and nurses moved with precision. He was just another patient now, not a billionaire, not a titan of industry, just a man lying on a table, fragile and breakable that the anesthesiologist leaned over, speaking softly. Richard caught Maria's face one last time through the small window in the door. She stood outside, hands pressed to the glass, tears streaming down her cheeks. Sophia was beside her, pale and trembling, her eyes never leaving her father. The mask lowered onto his face. "Breathe deeply, Mr. Hale," the anesthesiologist said. "We'll take care of you." Richard closed his eyes, inhaling the strange scent of medicine and plastic. His heart thundered, but he whispered silently into the void, "I'm ready." Then darkness. First there was nothing. Silence. Weightlessness. Then once again light. But this time it was different. Not the vast plain of his first vision. Not the gentle glow of warning. This light burned brighter, sharper, as if it was peeling away every last layer of his pride. "Richard Hale." The voice thundered again, and he fell to his knees. "You stand between life and death. You have chosen to give, but the price is great." Richard's voice cracked. "I'm not afraid anymore. Take my life if you must. Just let her live." The light pulsed, surrounding him. He saw flashes. Isabella's face lighting up with laughter, Maria hugging her daughter with joy, Sophia standing tall with pride. But then came another vision. His empire crumbling, his name forgotten, his wealth scattered like dust. "Do you still choose love?" the voice asked, "when it costs everything?" Richard trembled, his whole being shaking. He saw his skyscrapers, his fortune, his power, all fading like smoke. And then he saw Isabella, frail and gasping, reaching out a small hand. He stepped forward. "Yes," he whispered. "Even if I lose it all, even if I lose myself, I choose her." The light softened. For the first time, Richard felt embraced. Not condemned, not judged. Embraced. "Then your soul is no longer lost," the voice said. "But your body must fight." Back in the operating room, machines beeped frantically, BP dropping. A nurse shouted, "We're losing him." Dr. Bennett barked orders, sweat dripping down his brow. "Increase oxygen. Prepare the crash cart." Richard's body convulsed. His heart faltered. His life teetered on the edge. Inside the vision, he felt himself sinking, drowning in darkness. But then a sound and a voice. "Daddy." He turned. Sophia stood before him, not as she was now, but as a little girl again, clutching a teddy bear, her eyes wide with innocence. "Don't go," she whispered. "I still need you." His knees buckled. Tears poured down his face. Sophia. I'm so sorry. I wasn't there. I wasn't the father you needed. She shook her head. It's not too late. Please come back. In the real world, the defibrillator pads were placed on his chest, clear. His body jolted violently. The heart monitor spiked, then flatlined again. Clear. Another jolt. Another gasp, and then beeped at a faint but steady rhythm returned. Inside the vision, the darkness receded. Sophia's image faded into the light. And then another appeared, Isabella, standing strong, healthy, smiling. You did it, Mr. Hale, she said softly. You gave me a chance. Richard reached out, but before he could touch her, the light dissolved, pulling him backward, dragging him through a tunnel of blinding brilliance. His chest exploded with pain, his lungs burned. His eyes flew open, but he was back. The surgery was over. The doctors were exhausted, but relieved. The kidney transplant had been successful. Isabella now had a fighting chance, but Richard's body was weak, drained, teetering on the edge of collapse. Tubes and monitors surrounded him, his breath shallow. When Maria and Sophia were finally allowed in, they rushed to his side. Maria clasped his hand, pressing it against her tear-streaked face. You did it, you saved her. Sophia leaned over, her voice breaking. Dad, can you hear me? Richard opened his eyes, weak but alive. His lips parted, and in a hoarse whisper he said, Isabella, is she? She's stable, Maria sobbed. She's going to live. A tear slipped down Richard's cheek. He exhaled, his heart full for the first time in his life. Thank you, God, he whispered. That night, as he drifted in and out of consciousness, Richard realized the truth. Wealth had never been his salvation. Love was, and though his body was broken, his soul had finally been healed. The morning sun filtered softly through the hospital blinds, painting stripes of gold across Richard's pale, weak face. For the first time in weeks, he felt the quiet of survival, not the rush of deals or the glitter of wealth, but the simple miracle of being alive. Maria sat beside him, holding his hand. Isabella, now awake and smiling, reached out with her small hand and touched his arm. You saved me, she whispered, voice trembling but strong. I get to live because of you. Richard's lips quivered. He swallowed hard, feeling the weight of every word, every choice, every heartbeat that had brought him here. I didn't save you alone, he said hoarsely. God gave me the chance, and he let me do it. But you fought too. Your courage, it saved us both. Isabella smiled, eyes shining with a light that reached deep into his soul. I want to be strong, she said, so I can make the world better, just like you tried to. Richard felt tears well up in his eyes. All the money in the world could never have bought this moment. Innocence, gratitude, love. Sophia stood quietly by the door, watching her father and Isabella. She had spent weeks angry at him, angry at the universe, angry at life itself for leaving her and her sister. Because, though she wasn't Maria's child, she had felt the distance Richard had imposed. But seeing her father so vulnerable, yet so determined, softened her heart. She approached slowly. Dad! Her voice faltered. Richard turned, his weak smile touching her. I know. You don't have to say anything right now. I've been blind, Sophia. But maybe we can start over. Sophia blinked, fighting back tears. I'd like that, she whispered. She sat beside him, finally letting herself feel safe, feeling a father's love she had almost given up on. Over the next few weeks, Richard's recovery became a lesson in humility. He experienced life stripped of its usual trappings, no boardrooms, no jets, no towering skyscrapers to shield him from reality. Instead, he spent his days with Isabella and Maria, helping in small ways, learning her medication schedules, sitting through therapy sessions and listening, not telling, not controlling, just listening. He discovered the rhythm of ordinary life. Cooking simple meals, reading bedtime stories, playing card games with Isabella, and laughing in ways he hadn't laughed in years. And in doing so, he began to understand the true weight of his promise, not just to Isabella, but to God, to Maria, and to himself. One evening, Isabella tugged him outside to the small balcony of Maria's modest apartment. The city stretched below, a web of lights and distant sounds. Do you see all those people? She asked. So many. And some of them are lonely, like I was. But you made a difference in my life. That matters. Richard looked at her, his heart swelling. You remind me why it matters, Isabella. Every day, life isn't about power or money. It's about love and connection and hope. She smiled up at him, her small hand gripping his. Then we'll make more hope together. Right. He nodded, tears falling freely. Yes, together. Sophia, too, began to mend the distance that had once divided them. She watched her father care for another child with patience and compassion, and slowly realized he could be more than the man she had once resented. One afternoon, she sat beside Isabella, helping her with schoolwork. Richard watched quietly, a gentle smile on his face. It was the first time he truly understood the meaning of family beyond blood. A family built by choice, by love, by sacrifice. Even his heart, once confined to the cold vault of ambition, now beat with warmth and purpose. Months passed, and Isabella's health continued to improve. Doctors were amazed at her recovery, attributing it not only to the transplant, but also to her incredible resilience and the loving care surrounding her. Richard, though still recovering, felt more alive than ever. He had faced death, heard God's voice, and risked everything to honor a promise. And in return, he had received something no fortune could ever buy: redemption, connection, and the chance to love fully. That he often caught himself watching Isabella play, or listening to Sophia share stories from school. And he smiled quietly. Life had given him a second chance, not to conquer the world, but to build something far greater. A legacy of compassion, courage, and love. As the sun set over the city, Richard stood on the modest balcony, Isabella and Sophia by his side. He inhaled deeply, feeling the weight of every moment. The fear, the choices, the pain, the joy. I don't know what tomorrow holds, he said softly. But today, we are alive. And we have each other. That is enough. Isabella smiled, leaning against him. Sophia placed a hand on his shoulder. And in that quiet moment, Richard Hale, billionaire, survivor, father, and friend, understood what it truly meant to be rich, to have love, to give life, and to be present when it matters most. Months had passed since the life-altering surgery. Isabella's laughter now filled Maria's modest apartment, a sound so full of vitality that it seemed to chase away the shadows of the past. Richard Hale, once a man consumed by wealth and ambition, now felt his soul lighter, freer, and more alive than ever. He had returned to his penthouse, yes, but it no longer felt like home. The towers, the marble floors, the endless luxuries, they were empty, without purpose. True fulfillment, he realized, existed in the quiet moments, watching Isabella paint, helping Sophia with homework, sharing a simple meal with Maria. One afternoon, Richard organized a small celebration for Isabella's full recovery. Friends and family were present, but it was not opulent or extravagant. It was warm, intimate, and full of genuine joy. That Isabella's small hands clutched a ribbon as she prepared to cut the cake. Her smile was radiant, her eyes sparkling with gratitude. Richard knelt beside her, whispering, "You fought so hard, and you inspire me every day. Never forget that your life is precious, and your courage matters." She looked up at him and said softly, "You taught me that love is stronger than fear, and that hope can change everything." Richard felt a lump in his throat. She had learned the lesson he himself had spent a lifetime ignoring, that love, not money or power, defines a life well lived. Sophia approached Richard later, her voice hesitant but sincere. "Dad, thank you for everything. I see now how much you've changed. I see it in how you care, in how you live, and in how you love." Richard smiled, holding her hand. It took losing everything, nearly dying, and seeing what matters most to understand it. But we're here now, together. That's what counts. Sophia nodded, tears in her eyes. "I'm proud of you, and I forgive you." The words hit Richard like sunlight breaking through storm clouds. Forgiveness, true forgiveness, was a gift he had never expected to receive. And yet, here it was, offering him peace he had never known. Maria, too, embraced him with a gratitude that transcended words. "You didn't have to risk your life for my daughter," she said, her voice trembling. "But you did. You've changed our lives forever. I can never repay you." Richard shook his head. "You already have, Maria. You reminded me what it means to care, to give, to live for someone other than myself. That is the greatest reward I could ever receive." And in that moment, he understood fully that God's message was not only for Isabella, but for him as well. Love is the currency of life. Sacrifice is its highest form, and redemption is always possible if one opens their heart. That I am the weeks that followed. Richard made quiet changes in his life. He funded hospitals and programs to help children in need, not for recognition, not for accolades, but because he had experienced firsthand the life-saving power of compassion. That he spent time mentoring, volunteering, and teaching Isabella and Sophia the lessons he had learned too late in his own youth: courage in the face of fear, hope in the midst of despair, and the limitless strength of love. And Isabella thrived. Her laughter grew louder, her health stronger, and her spirit brighter. She became a symbol not of wealth, but of resilience, of the miracles that happen when someone chooses to love without hesitation. Point one evening, as the sun dipped below the horizon, Richard stood on the balcony of Maria's apartment with Isabella and Sophia by his side. The city lights twinkled below like countless tiny promises. He looked at the two girls and whispered, "You are my legacy, not the skyscrapers, not the billions, not the trophies. You are the proof that life is worth living, that love is eternal, and that every choice we make can change the world." Isabella held his hand tightly, and Sophia rested her head on his shoulder. The three of them watched the city together in silence, a family formed not only by circumstance, but by choice, by courage, and by heart. Richard Hale, once a man who had nearly died alone in a hospital room, had discovered the true meaning of life. And in doing so, he had created a legacy far greater than wealth, a legacy of the heart. That as night fell, Richard whispered a final prayer of gratitude. "Thank you, God, for showing me the way. Thank you for the chance to love, to give, and to change." And somewhere in the quiet of eternity, a gentle, approving presence smiled.